The applause for my sister's inauguration speech was still echoing across the room when her voice ripped through the air, sharp as a scalpel. "Cheryl, you're fired. Security will escort you out immediately." I didn't even get the chance to raise my glass for a toast. The entire magnificent ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton froze. Chairs turned, and crystal chandeliers seemed to tremble above the expensive wine glasses. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto me like a spotlight I never asked for. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and thinly veiled cruelty. Nobody stepped up. Not my parents, sitting at VIP table number 1. Not Aiden, my younger brother, smirking with a glass of scotch in his hand. They looked at me like I was a stain on the perfect family portrait of the Lawson Empire. They wanted to see me cry, beg, or make a scene so they'd have an excuse to get rid of me forever. But I didn't do that. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I slowly took the lanyard off my neck. The cold laminated badge had the word guest printed in huge letters instead of the co-founder title I should have had. I placed it on the crisp white tablecloth, right next to the untouched champagne flute. The plastic made a dry, small, but decisive sound in the dead silence. I turned my back to the stage where Vanessa stood with an arrogant smile of victory and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked on the marble floor, steady, calm, not rushing at all. The heavy doors closed behind me, cutting off the murmurs, locking all that fake glamour inside. They thought the humiliation ended there. They thought they had won. But they were wrong. When those doors closed, the silence wrapping around me wasn't defeat. It was the very first tick of a countdown clock I had just started. Before I show you what happens next, and how a guest badge became a death sentence for an entire empire, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I want to know if I'm the only one who's ever been treated like a spare part by their own family. I was 19 the first time I understood how power worked in my family. Quietly, unfairly, and always favoring the one who knew how to put on a show. That year, the family company HQ was just a cold concrete warehouse in North Kansas City. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, making a buzzing sound that gave you a headache. My dad stood next to a flimsy folding table, holding an employment contract promising a salary my friends couldn't even dream of. "Take it," he said, eyes glued to a small TV in the corner showing a football game. "Steady salary, reliable. What more do you want?" Vanessa, my sister, stood right behind him, spinning a set of new office keys on her finger like it was a crown. She was 21, loud, photogenic, and always the one chosen to be in the frame whenever investors visited. I looked at the attractive number on the paper, then at the white margin where the ink was smudged. Stability never impressed me. Ownership was what I needed. "I want equity instead of a salary," I said, my voice calm. My dad finally turned around. He looked at me, then at the thin stock agreement I had drafted myself and pushed toward him. A scornful smile appeared on his lips. Not the smile of a proud father, but of a businessman who just realized his partner was an idiot. "Equity?" He laughed, the sound echoing sourly in the empty warehouse. "You'd rather take this pile of worthless paper instead of hot cash every month? Fine, if you like working for free." Just then, the crowd on the TV roared. The Kansas City Chiefs had just scored a touchdown. My dad's eyes lit up with excitement. He grabbed a pen and scribbled on my agreement without reading a single line. His hand shook from the adrenaline of the game, making the signature an ugly, twisted zigzag. "Done." He tossed the paper back at me like charity. "Don't come back crying when you're hungry." Vanessa leaned close to my ear, whispering in that familiar, condescending tone. "You always make everything so complicated. Why not just be a good girl and take the money?" I didn't say anything. I quietly folded that fragile piece of paper and tucked it into a black folder. They saw trash. Me? For the first time, I felt the weight of a weapon forming in my hands. A year later, that shabby warehouse was filled with inventory, staff, and noise. But one thing never changed: the brutally uneven balance of power in this family. Every year end, when Dad handed out bonuses, Vanessa always got thick envelopes. The sound of that stack of cash hitting the table carried a heavy thud of authority. She'd grab it, fan it out like a deck of cards, laughing and bragging about upcoming luxury trips to the Maldives or Paris. And me? My reward was just a thin, black and white sheet of A4 paper. Still want equity? Dad would raise an eyebrow, a mix of boredom and pity, like he was giving a handout to a beggar too stupid to know how to spend money. He signed the transfer orders for tiny percentages, believing he was getting a great deal by offloading debt without spending a dime of actual cash. Then Aiden, my brother, joined the company. He walked through the aisles with the arrogant confidence of someone who knew the throne already had his name on it, despite his pathetic incompetence. When Aiden lost a whole week's worth of inventory reports, Dad didn't scold him once. He spun around to me, threw the messy file onto my desk, and growled, "Fix it." When Vanessa forgot a crucial call with our biggest client of the quarter, Mom sighed, poured her some tea, and defended her. "Vanessa is under so much pressure as the face of the company. You have to be understanding, Cheryl." I learned the bitterest lesson in silence. My mistakes were crimes. Their mistakes were just minor inconveniences. I became the high-end janitor for their glamour. But they didn't know that every time I cleaned up a mess, I made a backup copy. Every time they threw paper trash at me instead of a bonus, I got closer to owning the chairs they were sitting on. The turning point came in 2013, right in the living room of our old house. Vanessa was about to sign a flashy partnership deal, something she believed would get her on magazine covers, but I knew was actually a financial black hole that would drain the company's cash flow for years. Dad sat there, call on mute, eyes glued to the TV showing the season finale. "Deal looks good?" he asked vaguely, completely uninterested in the answer. Instead of arguing for the 1,000th time, I quietly pulled a single sheet of paper from my bag. It was an addendum I had drafted over weeks of sleepless nights. A protective measure, or more accurately, a sophisticated legal trap disguised in boring terminology. "Sign this too," I said, sliding the paper across the glass table. "Just a safety formality." The content was Clause 14C. If an executive without equity unilaterally fires a major shareholder without the absolute consensus of the board of directors, control of the company is immediately revoked. Dad didn't even glance at the title. His team had just scored on the screen. He swung his pen and signed the paper, eyes never leaving the slow-motion replay on TV. He thought he was signing a harmless administrative form to get me to shut up and go away. Vanessa glared at me, turned off her webcam, and hissed, "Why do you always have to stick your nose in?" "Always so annoying." I didn't reply. I took back the paper with the fresh ink, tucking it into the deepest part of my legal files. They had just handed me a loaded gun, simply because they were too arrogant to read what the invisible child wrote. 3 hours before the spotlight died, I arrived at the hotel, early enough to slip in like a ghost without anyone noticing. On the giant LED screens, Vanessa's face shone brightly under the text, "Our new CEO." Next to her was Aiden with the title VP of Sales. Below their portraits was the line, "Representing the founding family." No mention of me. No co-founder, no partner. I walked toward the seating chart pinned near the bar. My parents were at table 3, VIP. Vanessa and Aiden were at table 1. My finger traced down, past rows of strangers' names, and stopped at table 12, hidden behind a large pillar near the kitchen doors. Cheryl Lawson, guest. "Sit wherever, it doesn't matter." Aiden's voice rang out behind me. He was adjusting his cufflinks, not even looking at me. "Tonight isn't really for you, is it?" In that moment, everything clicked. The scornful looks, the unread signatures, the stripped titles. I wasn't just forgotten. I was being systematically erased. I looked at the cold guest badge in my hand, then slowly put it around my neck. The strap rubbed against my collarbone like a cruel reminder. I smiled at Aiden, a smile he wouldn't understand until it was too late. I accepted this position of guest because tonight, this guest was going to decide who stayed and who had to leave. I drove home in absolute silence. When the garage door closed behind me, I didn't go inside the house. I placed my laptop on the cold hood of my black Tahoe and opened it with the same calm I had when I took off that badge. I opened the folder named Continuity. Inside was 16 years of legal documents. I started the sequence: type, attach, archive, send. The first encrypted email went to Mr. Whitman, chairman of the board, and Mr. Grant, the chief counsel. Next, I opened the Courier app. Physical packages containing the original Clause 14C and evidence of Vanessa's financial misconduct were already sealed. I hit send. A green circle appeared on the screen. 14 minutes. That was the time for the courier to reach the hotel. Finally, I accessed the online voting portal, a system I had built myself. In the top corner, my true ownership percentage sat there, silent, unadvertised, but intact. This wasn't impulsive revenge. This was a mandatory audit. My phone buzzed for the first time, breaking the silence of the garage. The screen lit up with Aiden's name, then Vanessa, then Mom. The calls were rapid, panicked. Perhaps at the hotel, Mr. Whitman had started whispering something into Mr. Grant's ear. I didn't answer. I did something much crueler. Block, block, block. Name after name went onto the blacklist. I didn't want to hear explanations, didn't want to hear hypocritical accusations. On the laptop screen, the status bar turned green, synchronization complete. I glanced at my watch. 3 hours had passed. The board members must have received the encrypted emails. Rational people were reading the words I had drafted in the shadows over the last 16 years. The balance of power had tipped. I closed the laptop. The click sounded dry and sharp. Time to go back. Not as a shunned guest, but as the true owner. 3 hours later, I returned to the hotel. The party was at its fake climax. I walked through the main doors, head held high. The moment my heels touched the red carpet, the atmosphere shifted. The security team, the men Vanessa believed were serving her, started to move. They looked toward me, waiting for a nod. One guard quietly locked the west exit. Another blocked the service corridor. The room was now a cage. Vanessa was standing on the podium, her wine glass freezing in midair when she saw me. "What the hell are you doing here?" Vanessa screamed into the mic, a piercing shriek. "Security! Throw this intruder out immediately! She's been fired!" 2 large security guards stepped forward, but instead of rushing at me, they walked past me, turned their backs to me, and stood blocking the aisle, forming a living wall to protect me. "What are you guys doing?" Aiden yelled. "My sister just gave you an order." "They don't take orders from employees, Aiden," I said, my voice calm but echoing. Right then, the crystal chandelier went dark. The giant LED screen shuddered, Vanessa's image tearing apart, replaced by a black interface with cold white text: emergency shareholder meeting status, activated legal basis, Clause 14C. The sound of glass shattering on the marble floor rang out. The trap had sprung. I walked up to the stage, slowly took the guest badge off my neck, and placed it on the podium, right next to the speaker's water glass. "You labeled me a guest in my own company," I said. "Now, the guest is running the meeting." I tapped a key on my laptop. The screen behind shifted to a zoomed-in image, an old contract from 2013. At the bottom of the page, my father's signature appeared huge, distorted, shaky, and ugly. The signature he had scribbled while his eyes were glued to a football game. "Dad, remember this?" I asked. "You signed it because you were too greedy to pay me a salary and too arrogant to read what I wrote. You thought it was trash, but tonight, it is your sentence." The room gasped. Vanessa tried to rush over to grab the mic, but Mr. Whitman stepped up to block her. Voting proceeding under Clause 14C, removal of current executive board due to violation of shareholder rights. On the screen, a green status bar began to rise. 58%, 65%, 71%. "Motion passed," Mr. Whitman announced coldly. "Control of the company immediately reverts to majority shareholder Cheryl Lawson. Vanessa, Aiden, you are fired. Please leave the premises." Aiden dropped his phone. Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect makeup unable to hide the collapse. 4 months later, the air in the headquarters building has completely changed. My new office is at the end of the hall. The brushed steel nameplate on the door reads simply, "President." My family has scattered. Vanessa had to sell her villa to pay debts. My parents quietly moved to Florida. Aiden tried to apply for jobs, but the non-compete clause I enforced blocked every path. They tried to reach out, but I didn't answer anyone. Silence is the best filter. But I did send Vanessa one single parting gift. One morning, she received an envelope from my office. Inside, there was no check. Only an old, rusty key. The key to the warehouse office she used to spin on her finger so arrogantly years ago. Attached was a note. "You always liked holding keys. You can keep this as a souvenir. It's the only thing you're allowed to own now." I closed the file on my desk. The click was crisp. Many people mistake power for the person holding the microphone. They are wrong. Real power lies quietly in the documents nobody bothers to read, in the signatures they rush to put down. My family learned that lesson at the highest price. As for me, I learned something simpler. Silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. If you also believe that silence is the loudest roar, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't miss the next story, where justice is served in the shadows.